The screen blending mode is kind of the opposite of the multiply blending mode. Whereas in the multiply blending mode, you make black opaque and white remains transparent. It's the exact opposite for screen. Black becomes transparent and white becomes opaque. So why might we want to use something like that? Usually for special effects and for lighting, and especially the lens flare effects. I'm going to show you how you can use the screen blending mode to make some really cool lens flares. Now, many of us are already familiar with how to use a lens flare. You go up to your filter menu at the top of the screen, and then you click on render, and then you click on lens flare. Then you can choose any of the lens flare options here and move the lens flare anywhere you want, and then click OK. The problem with doing the lens flare this way is that it is a destructive editing technique. What if you wanted to move this lens flare around, or your editor comes back to you and says, hey, I want you to reduce the lens flare a little bit, or I want you to move the lens flare over here? Guess what? You can't, because the lens flare is locked onto the image. Now, many students get around this idea by duplicating the layer that the lens flare is on. But the problem with that is you still can't move the lens flare to a different part of the image after you have placed it. So let's go back, and now let's use the screen blending mode to make this lens flare in a more non-destructive way. So I'm going to hit Shift-Command-N to make a new layer, and I'm going to change the blending mode of this new layer from normal to screen. Then I'm going to click Fill with Screen Neutral Color, which is black. Now check this out. You can't see anything, right? Blank layer. If I were to change this layer from the screen blending mode to the normal blending mode, it would be a plain black layer. You can't see the curtains behind it. So I'm going to go back to the screen blending mode, and now I'm going to go to Filter, Render, Lens Flare. I'm going to choose the lens flare that I want. Move it kind of closer together. Can choose any of these, and now I'm going to click OK. Now check this out. If your editor comes back to you and says, you know what, I would love the lens flare to be moved more down in the corner, or rotated a little bit so that the smaller light is pointing downward, guess what? You can easily do that. Also, because this is on a separate layer, you can reduce the opacity of the lens flare if your client decides that they want that opacity reduced. And also, because this is on a separate layer, you can add an adjustment layer such as hue saturation. You can use the clipping mask, which is holding down the Alt button and then clicking on the line between the adjustment layer and the new layer. And you can colorize your lens flare. You can make your lens flare a completely different color. So the screen blending mode is a way that we can make our lens flare, make it non-destructive. We can make it editable. We can move it around. We can lower the opacity. We can change the color of it. And it just gives you a lot more flexibility